Hi, and welcome to the Special Situations cast. My name is Bram de Haas. I run the Special Situations report, which you can find on Seeking Alpha. Before we jump into the interview with my guest of today, I want to make a few things clear. Nothing on this show is investment advice. It's for entertainment purposes. Either me or my guest may have positions in any stocks or securities that we discuss. So keep that in mind, and please go and enjoy my interview of today. Thank you. And welcome to another episode of the Special Situation Report cast. Today I have a very special guest, Cate Long. She has an extensive background in finance with ING Barings and ABN Amro, and she predicted a future insolvency for Puerto Rico back in 2012, and that was basically on no one's radar. She also holds 2 US patents and advised on the creation of Dodd-Frank, if I can put it like that. And you have a lot of experience lobbying Congress and the SEC. Did I introduce you about right? And
yes.
I'm a little bit curious what kind of patents you hold, because I got that from your website, but I don't.
Right. So the patents, and hi, thank you for having me. The patents that I hold relate to the visualization and standardization of credit ratings, and then other types of market data for a way to create a platform for retail investors to be able to look at municipals or corporates in the same way they look at stocks. So the idea is once we get Puerto Rico in some kind of conclusive state, I'll pivot to hopefully building that and creating a market for retail investors in the United States for corporate and municipal debt.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah, it's much cooler than Puerto Rico. Yes, right.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You've been occupied by Puerto Rico for a long time, so I guess you kind of like it.
Well, just I'm committed to getting it to that sort of end state, and that's what I've been pushing. So.
Yeah, and I invited you because I was so curious about the whole debt restructuring of the Puerto Rico bonds, and well, you are like the expert on it, and so maybe could you start by how that went, that you saw this coming in 2012, and how you basically got deeper involved.
So in 2012, I was writing for Reuters. I wrote a daily column on the municipal bond market, which is a pretty boring market. And I had covered successive municipal bankruptcies in Stockton and Viejo. We had a series after the financial crisis of muni bankruptcies. We call them Chapter 11 or Chapter 9, excuse me. And Puerto Rico was coming to market. I didn't know anything about Puerto Rico's finances, and they were coming to market to do a general obligation deal. So I sat down and read the offering documents and just said, these people, consistently are running higher levels of expense than they're collecting revenue. They're filling the gap with, debt issuance. And in the municipal market, state and local governments need to run flat budgets, that are balanced every year. And so I just wrote this column and said, these people are going to default because they have this pattern of not being able to keep their finances in order. And it was just way ahead of the market. And then I wrote maybe I wrote 80 more columns for Reuters on Puerto Rico till 2014. And then I left and started doing research for bondholders. And then 2016, the liquidity of Puerto Rico, this is under the Obama administration, got really dire. And the U.S. Treasury pushed Congress to create some kind of framework for restructuring Puerto Rico's debt. And because I had been, had followed and analyzed these 9 prior municipal bankruptcies, I just advised Congress in terms of how to do PROMESA, which is the framework governing Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, which means it exists under Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution, which gives it less rights, less sovereign rights than a U.S. state would have. And that's why this law, PROMESA, was created outside of the U.S. Bankruptcy Code.
All right, yeah. So that's
Yeah,
a really important law to maybe flag for people who are not familiar with the
yeah,
situation because, yeah. So it's a different bankruptcy than
correct,
usual, and with a little bit different rules. So things may play out in ways that
correct,
you wouldn't expect if you did
right.
regular, I don't know, California bankruptcies or.
Right. The way the current bankruptcy code in the United States is that states cannot go bankrupt. Um, they, and this has to do with the contracts clause of the U.S. Constitution and the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. But states have the authority to decide whether some entities, their children, so to speak, can go to bankruptcy or not, and they can either authorize that or allow the entity, like say Chicago, for example, Illinois has to pass, the state legislature in Illinois has to pass a specific law that would authorize Chicago to go into bankruptcy. But other states, for example, California, prior to 3 years ago, this, that sub-entity or the child could just basically go to bankruptcy on its own. It
And
needs the authority of the parent.
and are the sub entities? Those are like the if it's like there's like a bridge that holds a bridge, or maybe the revenue collection of the
Right.
taxes, or
Right. So in our market, we have 80,000 children or sub-entities, and
okay.
it's cities, counties, hospitals, waste, recovery facilities, bridges, tolls, school districts, hospitals. We got utilities, public utilities. We got everything. So, we have probably, I don't know, maybe it's like 25% of the economy or something
And
in the
those
muni space.
can go bankrupt, those sub entities, and that's a little bit like it goes with companies in Delaware for like new viewers.
So half the states allow bankruptcy, these children to go to the federal court and file Chapter 9 or bankruptcy. And then the other half, the other 25 or so states have guide rails and gating requirements on those children to say, look, first you have to, either come to the state and explain to us what's wrong, or, work with the state, or, our workout group at the state, or, whatever. Each state has the ability to determine how they're going to treat their own children.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so Puerto Rico has its whole unique thing. So that's PROMESA. And
Right.
maybe you could also explain what the Puerto Rico oversight board is, because it's also a key player.
So Puerto Rico as a territory is a child of Congress. It's child's Congress. And Congress said, the parents said, okay, you blew it, you're bankrupt now, and we're going to put in an oversight board. This is very similar to what happened in Washington, D.C., which is also a child of Congress. D.C. is not a state. And in D.C.'s instance and Puerto Rico's, it's Congress saying, look, these are people, so-called independent people, we're going to put over you to manage this process, this restructuring process, or reform, revitalization process. District of Columbia, Washington didn't really have much bonded debt. They had this massive pension liability. So we don't have a direct parallel, but the framework is essentially the same, of Congress saying, you've been a bad child, and now we're going to put in these monitors to control what you're doing.
And are you like a little bit familiar with the situation of Greece after the financial?
Greece?
Yeah.
So it's somewhat, the IMF playing a role, right? I mean, any sovereign restructuring, often because IMF has done lending there, or lending in arrears, whatever, has a role in restructuring. It's somewhat similar. Congress, in the case of Puerto Rico, gave it substantial authority, sort of reaching into the operation of the government, whereas IMF, it's more consensual, right? They have to force the sovereign to do something by withholding money. In the case of Puerto Rico, the oversight board has direct legal authority to go in and actually through the budget to say, look, you cannot spend on whatever X or Y. So
right. So the
IMF wouldn't have that level of authority.
The oversight board really has a lot of influence, and
yes,
okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then maybe, I hope I'll pronounce this right, but they're like AMBAC or AMBAC, which is like a bond insurer.
Yes.
I read their earnings call, and they rather viciously criticized this oversight board for spending like 750 million on advisors and consultants, and they were really cheering that it was getting overhauled and there were new members. How are you looking at that?
Okay, so I didn't read the AMVAC call, but those guys were very aggressive. And from what you're describing, their comments, I would, agree with them 1,000%. So the Congress created this framework, PROMESA, to require the oversight board to work consensually with creditors, which would be more like an Argentina workout or a Greek workout or something. And instead, the prior members, the ones, mainly the guy that the president just kicked off, Judge Gonzalez, his attitude was, we're going to have scorched earth litigation. We're going to litigate these guys for years till they're worn down. And in the meantime, we're going to start doing deals with distressed guys who in sovereigns you would call cheapest to deliver, right? They're the guys that buy the bonds at very low distressed prices so they can negotiate, their recoveries at much lower rates than the guys that own them at 100. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but that's the major game in these restructurings. And so AMVAC, again, just relying on what you said, I'm sure was happy that the guy that was the architect.
Oh, your sound is gone. Okay, one sec. Your sound is gone for some reason. Oh, now, can you say
Yeah, for like 10 seconds you faded out, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So can you repeat your question?
Sure, it was about AMBAC or AMBAC. They're a bond insurer, and we were talking about the battle that they're having with the hedge funds.
Yeah.
You were making a point, and I didn't catch it.
Oh, so the point was that AMVAC, I didn't read their comments. I'm just relying on what you're telling me. I didn't read their conference call, but yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with them. The oversight board member that was kicked off, Judge Gonzalez, the president removed, was, only wanted to litigate for years, and Congress, directly said to do consensual negotiations. So Congress said, I want everybody to sit around the table and get to a deal. And Judge Gonzalez said, forget what Congress wants. I just want to beat on these guys in the court. And that was ridiculous. It doesn't help Puerto Rico. And,
Yeah, because it's been a long process. That's not unusual for bankruptcy restructurings. But do you think there's like a real shift in how this will move forward? Do you think it will resolve faster now? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so the next push is to get the other old members of the board gone, and get the attorney that was the current attorney for the oversight board pushed out, and McKinsey pushed out. These are the people. These are the old players that created this mess, and President Trump wants Puerto Rico to make progress, and part of that is getting this bankruptcy move forward and out of the stall mode that it's been in for a couple of years. So, make arguments to Congress and to, the executive branch, like why remove these people. So.
Yeah, so, okay, maybe I wanted to ask about that later, but maybe it ties in real nice here. Do you think if the Democrats win the upcoming election, or maybe there's even a blue wave, is there a risk that it will stall again, or that we see a reversal of this?
No, I mean, I talked to Democrats a fair amount. I've never talked to the Biden campaign, but one, the Democrats are likely to increase the amount of social benefits that Puerto Rico gets by, maybe like $6 or $8 billion a year. And Puerto Rico now doesn't get the same level of, say, Medicaid or food stamps that people on the mainland get in the States. So if Dems come in, we're going to get an immediate boost in the economy. We're going to get just massive cash, grants to individuals in Puerto Rico. So that's very positive all the way around. And, Democrats would have to change PROMESA. And if if there was full control of every branch, both houses of Congress and the White House, they could do it. But if one of them was still in control of Republicans, then they couldn't. It's just a heavy lift. PROMESA itself was a very heavy lift to get done. Very complex law. And there's been numerous discussions of reforming it and legislation filed over the last 4 years, but none of it's made any headway. So,
all right, and it doesn't seem like an issue that you really want to like.
Look, you go on the Hill, nobody wants to talk about Puerto Rico. It's very complex. It's almost none of the members of Congress have significant Puerto Rican constituencies, except for like Florida for Rubio and Scott, and Menendez in New Jersey, and a little bit in Pennsylvania. So it's like on the list of what a member of Congress has to deal with, Puerto Rico is not even on the list. So getting people to focus on it is really difficult. And it would have to come from the top. It wouldn't come immediately. Even if there was a full dim wave, which I don't think will happen, a blue wave, it wouldn't be at the top of the agenda to address this. What might be at the top of the agenda is making Puerto Rico and DC a state, this is this thing where it would add 4 more senators to the Senate. And even that, I think there would be significant litigation, and, there'd just be a huge fight over that. So.
And do you think, is this, I have the impression that it is really holding Puerto Rico back, this restructuring, and it's really bad for region?
Yeah, absolutely. You get big money guys that want to go in and, make investments there, real estate investments, or, even now this issue of Trump and Navarro and those guys wanting to bring pharmaceutical manufacturing back to Puerto Rico, which there is a substantial base already. It's just, everything's in disarray. And, the oversight board, I fault, and the reason I've been working for a couple of years to push them out is because the structural issues in Puerto Rico that need to be addressed to build it into a really successful economy and society, they've never addressed. And number one, it's corruption. And, Trump talks about this all the time, and he's dead on. It's really super corrupt there. And, just as an example, as a sort of a side note, like in the United States, if you run a little government, any kind of sized government, and you want to issue a contract, you have to bid it out, right? You have to post the contract publicly and say, we want this bridge repaired, make some bids. Puerto Rico, any contract that they give out under $150,000, you just give it out to whoever they want. So we have tens of thousands of contracts going out every year just to whoever, buddies, this kind of stuff's nonsense. It's a massive drag on the economy there, and it consolidates the power of the two parties, which are very corrupt in my view, the two local parties. So, these are things that President Trump is interested in doing. Old oversight board would never address, and hopefully the new board coming in will, I know they're committed to working on this stuff. So, and that just is all, for the benefit of bondholders, right? you don't want bonds from an endlessly corrupt issuer.
No, it becomes a lot harder to, I don't know. I've been surprised a few years back when Argentina issued one of the famous $100-year bond.
What's it trading at now, like 30 cents or something? Yeah.
Maybe again, because, they were close to a deal, and then I think there was, it went bad again. Let's see. Like early 2020, a deal was reached with the credit hedge funds that are involved here.
Yeah.
And that was later shut down. What happened there, and was that an important point? And did it mark like a baseline of what the bonds are worth?
Yeah, that's exactly probably the point in terms of people that are not in the in Puerto Rico yet is that, that deal, and there's many views on it and how it will go forward, but essentially in my view that those recoveries that were negotiated in that there was several, like several amendments to that deal with the hedge funds is a baseline, but there'll be more litigation unless they get, start consensually negotiating this. And in the meantime, I was sort of the driver to point out that there was a lot of inside trading that went on during the negotiation of that deal with the hedge funds. And essentially they were in mediation, secret mediation, for ages, months and months, and they traded hundreds of millions of dollars of bonds. And
so yeah, that's a headline that hit recently, and the way I understood it was that well, in a restructuring, the bondholders are involved in the negotiations, and while they were doing that, they bought up bonds on the open market.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Right. And they have their attorneys have like multiple excuses to say that we were shielded by X, Y, and Z, and my contention has always been nothing in the bankruptcy code shields them, and nothing in securities law shields them. And yesterday, the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, which has oversight of Puerto Rico, wrote a letter to the executive director of the oversight board and said, just stop negotiating with these people until this investigation is done, until an investigation of this trading is completed.
Sure, and if like the bond insurers, they have to pay out if the if there's restructuring, they have to pay out the difference between the par bonds and
right. They've been paying out all along for 4 years. They've been paying full par. So when there's no debt, I mean, that was part of the strategy of the old board, and this guy that got the president replaced was to, put this financial pressure on the bond insurers by keeping everything stalled so that they have to continue paying out, interest and principal to the matured bonds that they wrap.
Okay, so they're not hurt if they're on the hook for like the delta between the restructuring, the haircut.
Well, they'd be happy to get anything. They're fighting to get as much as they can, but they've been paying the delta for them for the last 4 years has been 100 that they've paid, right? Because every bond they wrap, when debt service comes due, they write a check. So I don't even know what the number is for them. Those guys, I don't know, maybe they've written $1 billion or more of principal and interest over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So, for them, I think the play is, how much pain are they willing to endure in this, as the case is litigated versus what they believe their legal rights entitle them to in terms of recovery. And, I don't really know. They each have their own thing. They each have their own book of wraps, through this massive debt stack in Puerto Rico, and they sometimes conflict with each other in terms of litigating. So,
right. So you really have like a very top-down perspective of this is what's happening, and like a real objective, or that's what you try to do.
Yeah. The same way I did analyze the 9 bankruptcies when I was at Reuters. When you're sort of sitting outside. And, I think it's a little more unique in this case because I helped construct the law, and I see all these people going off the rails and not following the law. I'm like yelling about it, right? I'm yelling on Twitter. I'm yelling at Congress. I'm yelling, I'm writing letters to the court saying, get back on track, So,
so it bothers you that it's taking so long, or
what's that?
It's really bothering you that it's taking so long, or?
Well, Congress didn't want it to take this long. Okay. So, it bothers me because, we spent a lot of time fighting to create a law. And when Congress creates a statute, the people that are, given authority to execute it are supposed to follow it. Right. And this is not my first rodeo with Congress in creating law. This is my third one. Dodd-Frank was the one prior. And then before that was law creating oversight for credit rating agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And in both those instances, I saw agencies go out and execute the law as Congress had written it. So now I'm in Puerto Rico and I see this oversight board just doing whatever they want. I'm like, folks, this isn't how it goes.
So you're, I actually don't know, you're living in Puerto Rico as well?
No, I never go to
Okay.
Puerto Rico. They
Okay.
kill me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's no, I was just interested why why it really why you're so passionate about it, or why bothers you so much.
Well, listen, here's the baseline. It's likely some of the states will go into bankruptcy too. And a lot of the principles that we're fighting for in Puerto Rico and how Congress views this and the public views this, market views this, is going to be set. The law is not directly transferable, but the expectations and, what happens here in Puerto Rico. And, Illinois has got, on liabilities that are very difficult for them to take care of, Connecticut, New Jersey, Kentucky. So, there's sort of an interest at a very high level in terms of just how this all plays out. And again, they need to follow the law that Congress passed. So
yeah, it's a real tough situation, because once you have like a lot of debt, you have to raise taxes, people start leaving.
right.
And it's a vicious cycle in wrong direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Greece. Right. Argentina.
Yeah. I hope it gets solved, or that the solution will be found. So yeah, we already went over that you don't think like the presidency is a big game changer. Or do you want to comment more on that, or?
No, I just think, again, it's like, like say you're running an electron microscope or something, and coming, so a new crowd comes in, buys the business, comes in, like changing how the electron microscope works is a very complicated process. And you could consider Puerto Rico much like that. And, so yeah, the new crowd can come in and then make adjustments and change processes, but still is very complicated. So.
Sure. And then you just mentioned Illinois and New Jersey and a few other states. Do you think, like, Puerto Rico, would you see it as like an opportunity in the municipal bond market, or?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. But anyone that wants to, maybe step in has to know that it could still take quite a bit longer. And I know there's a fair amount of interest generally among, market participants that aren't in, but it's more like, how long do you want to commit the dollars there, right? So,
right.
The workout could take, optimistically like 6 or 9 months, or it could take 2 more years, or it could take more, right? So most people, given that there's so many other bankruptcies going to be happening, most people are like, they see Puerto Rico as sort of like California Roach Motel, right? Like you go in, you never get out. So.
Right, and in terms of like what it looks like, when I look at it, it ranges from, there are bonds that are sort of high yield at like 5%, and then there's all the way to like pretty distressed at like 50% or even lower, but then a really long maturities.
Yeah, so there's one class of debt, the sales tax debt, that got restructured last year, and COFINA is called, and it trades, and the high yield mutual funds own it, and the ETFs. It's essentially, like a legitimate bond now. So people buy that because the yield's pretty wide, spreads wide compared to like a AAA muni or something. But then the rest of the debt stack, that was like, it's like 15 billion of the 70 billion. The other 55 billion plus is still unstructured, trades anywhere from 5 cents, some of this appropriation debt, which has no claim, particularly strong legal claim, go anywhere from 50 cents to, high 60s now on some of the GO debt, the general obligation debt. So you have this widespread, every class of debt in the debt stack has different legal protections and cross claims to other parts of the debt stack.
Yeah, and there, well, I don't know, maybe you have the number, how many different issues are there, or like very...
CUSIPs, I think in terms of CUSIPs, there's like 10,000 CUSIPs, maybe even more. I don't
And
know. I mean,
in terms
we
of
don't really. I mean, the guys that sit on trading desks at the dealers, they look at sort of CUSIP level, but it's impossible to, follow the story at the CUSIP level.
sure,
There's one sort of benchmark bond, the one they issued in 2014, which people often in the media quotes. So it's a general obligation debt that was issued in 2014, and it was like $3.5 billion, which was the biggest bond issue in the municipal market for high yield because it was junk rated when it came. People look at that, and it's called the eights of 2014. The coupon was like 8, and other than that, people don't really particularly talk about specific bonds.
Right, so they take that and use it as a benchmark.
Yeah.
This is most liquid, but that's
Yeah.
actually sort of wrong because they're all very different. And
Exactly.
then there are like these earlier you referenced them as like sub organizations.
Children.
The children.
Yeah.
There are like 8 or so of those, or
So in the debt stack, I think there would be like 12.
oh,
Yeah.
12.
So that's that issued debt, and then Puerto Rico itself has like 120 agencies in the government, which is all like nonsense anyway. But in terms of entities, Puerto Rican government entities, central government entities that issue debt, I think it's like 12 now, 12 or 13.
All right. Yeah, and then you because I mentioned this before we went live that I looked at what like credit hedge funds were investing in and thought it was so interesting that they all picked like different children to
right
to pick it,
take positions in.
Yeah, and there was not really a consensus of like this is a great security. So that it was interesting to me that they were like all took different.
Well, that's another whole conversation, the strategies of the hedge funds. But there were many pockets of available bonds in the debt stack just because it's been so confusing and so strung out that people are just selling, right? Like across the board, people, I mean, listen, so the municipal bond market is traditionally very conservative, and people see something in a headline, they just sell a bond. They just want their principal back, right? So
often funds can't hold it anymore.
Correct. Right, exactly. So what you got when Puerto Rico got really into distress, and then as Congress created this law, and they started defaulting on their debt, you just got the municipal market just started puking a lot of this debt, and because they just like a regular mutual fund doesn't have the capacity to follow the litigation, and like you said, their mandate, right, their fiduciary mandate may exempt them or say they can't even hold the debt. So.
Yeah, I think that's often the case. Otherwise they could call you maybe, or someone. And then
me, they don't want to do it. yeah.
And then there are like the bond insurers. Those are also interesting to mention. Like a few of them have like pretty large positions. Puerto Rico, and I think they're trading very well, maybe not distressed valuations, but like at 0.5 times book value because of this situation. So I don't
really look at their stocks. I mean, every now and then I'll just look, like when everything crashed in March, they sold off pretty bad, like a lot of the financial firms.
It's like AMBAC and MBA and
Assured. AGO.
Yes, that's the one that David Einhorn is.
That was nonsense. Yeah.
Loves.
Yeah. Well, he didn't make any money on that, right? I think he got burned on that. So
he has
these guys are very aggressive, very smart. They've been in the municipal market 30 years. They know this stuff better than anybody. I think also important to note with those guys is, following the financial crisis, they had wrapped or insured a lot of residential mortgage-backed securities, and they litigated against like 16 Wall Street banks and won. So they're battle hardened, and this idea that they're just gonna like lay back and take this nonsense from former board member Judge Gonzalez was a mistake from the beginning.
Okay.
So essentially, it's them litigating very hard with the Unsecured Creditors Committee, often against the hedge funds, often against the oversight board. And, they have a mixed record in terms, I think, of what their litigation outcomes have been. But, they're very clear on what their rights are here in the bankruptcy, and they'll litigate to ensure their rights.
So it's been really fireworks here from a legal perspective.
Yeah. So in terms of just endless bankruptcy stories, yes, absolutely. And then the other thing that this former board member that actually denigrating, Judge Gonzalez, he was the judge in Chrysler and oversaw the Chrysler bankruptcy, which in the bankruptcy community was also like unbelievable because he crammed down secured creditors, which the bankruptcy code says you cannot do, and essentially allowed the transfer of all the value of assets to the unions and the retirees in that situation, which upends the bankruptcy code. And then we have him come in Puerto Rico and do very similar approach where he just has no regard or little regard for what either the bankruptcy code or the federal statute says, and just does what he wants. So the bankruptcy community is watched pretty closely because just, there's like a lot of shenanigans in terms of what's happening.
Why? Just so from a it's obviously a tragic situation, but do you kind of like it from a professional standpoint that you can enjoy how it's being fought to the wire, or is that not something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the guys that followed GSEs, right? Fannie and Freddie, the same thing, right? You just have these big. You have a lot of money at stake. You have very complex legal issues at stake. You have people, different parties making very aggressive legal attacks. And from that perspective, it is very interesting.
And maybe it influences the whole future of the field. So that's
yeah. There's parts of it that are very important. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I don't want to keep you too long, and maybe a few last things that we could get into. I'm curious about what kind of bonds do you think that are relatively well positioned in the whole Puerto Rico debt stack, is how you call it?
Yeah, so the bonds that I said that have already been restructured in trading, the COFINA, there's a junior and senior there. There's a whole variety of maturities and, different interest rates and stuff. Those trade very well. If you're interested in owning just, debt with high coupon, that's a very solid, for the most part, very solid place to play. And then, in terms of the overall debt stack, again, I think these GOs, the general obligation debt, is something to look at, but you have to be willing to sit if necessary. And what happens in Puerto Rico, like many parts of the municipal market, is small lots, small, like say 20,000, 20 bonds or something, trades at a very wide spread to what the block trade is. So in a lot of cases, you could pick up 5 points just because these small lots, odd lots become, are trading way off what the, sort of average block trade is. So, that's something I think where people are making money too.
So yeah, if you're a smaller investor or you're willing to trade that, then it's an interesting market.
Yeah, but just let me say here that, if you have no understanding of the municipal market or trading debt, Puerto Rico is not the place to start. It's like you've never been to school, then you go get a PhD. So, it's not, I would say look at your own state. If you're a U.S. investor, you look at your own state first and try and understand what the bonds are offered there.
Sure, that sounds sensible. And if people are thinking about they're in some way involved, maybe through insurers or through more liquid bonds, what are signs that we could look at in terms of action from Puerto Rican government or from this oversight board that would really mean, okay, things are improving or things are
Yeah.
better. What are you looking for or hoping?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big one happened 2 weeks ago when the president replaced this, Judge Gonzalez, who had ruined the whole process, in my view. And then the president will be appointing more new members. And, now it's sort of a fight who he's going to appoint. And there's all these internal struggles between congressional leadership and the White House. And, just part of it is the Democrats are waiting on the election to happen. And the majority leader, McConnell, is like waiting, he's waiting on the election too. So it's like, probably post November 3, we'll have a lot more clarity where the White House is going to go. And, my push is to get all the old board members removed and replace them with new people with new vision sort of for Puerto Rico, back to this idea of, creating these structural changes that will, encourage, firms, manufacturing firms like pharmaceuticals and medtech to come back, more of them to come back. So that's really where the emphasis needs to shift to, and just stop all the court litigation and focus on helping the people of Puerto Rico, make an economy that's vibrant and open for, new business and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because I think that's has been implemented a little bit. Like, I think there are like lower taxes, or there are like, it has like very attractive properties, right?
Yeah, so Puerto Rico has these local laws called Act 2022. There's two of them. And one relates to individuals and one relates to businesses for mainland high net worth people to come to Puerto Rico and establish residency for half the year plus a day. And then they're exempt from federal income taxes, because Puerto Ricans do not pay federal income taxes. And they only have to pay 4% income tax to the Puerto Rican government. So this is like the ultimate tax haven for. And then there's things for corporations, which are like a different category. So they have some
Silicon Valley, or
yeah. Well, a lot of the crypto guys went down to Puerto Rico because they don't want to pay taxes anyway. And so I would say I think right now like 6,000 of these entities. And then last night, the U.S. attorney in Puerto Rico just arrested this guy, the head of one of the accounting firms, for falsifying this information for these people that are coming to take this tax incentive. So I think that, Puerto Rico sort of had this idea that they would become the Cayman Islands of America. And I think the U.S. Treasury and the IRS is like, no, you're not going to become, the Cayman Islands of America. Or at least if you do it, you have to do it legally.
So once that really started rolling, not everybody agreed, or
yeah, well, the thing is just fraud, right? I mean, Puerto Rico has a massive level of corruption and fraud, and it goes from local, on the ground at the municipalities, what we call towns or something, to the central government, and then things like these tax incentives. Massively corrupt there compared to the U.S. mainland.
And what do you view like as like what are like really great improvements they could make, or and how do you see like the future in general for Puerto Rico?
So Puerto Rico had this massive hurricane in 2017, September of 2017, called Maria, and through a lot of struggles, working with like Congress, like all these fights, Congress essentially is allocating $80 billion to rebuild Puerto Rico. Some of that money has started flowing. Congress spent $4 or $5 billion standing up the electric utility once it fell down after the hurricane. And then we have $10 or $11 billion more coming in to harden the electric utility. And Puerto Rican, for example, the cell service has all gone to 5G now. It's all been rebuilt. FCC gave them like $1 billion. So now they're the only entity in the United States that has 5G coverage. So as a consequence of this hurricane, which was horrific, and a lot of people died because of just the way it was so poorly handled, they're going to be entirely rebuilt. New roads, new schools, new blah, blah, blah. The new electric utility, which is very important. Puerto Rico is set to really excel, like super excel. But again, you have to get this corruption under control. And President Trump wants the oversight board to take a more active role in that. And the U.S. attorney was just recently replaced. I mentioned him, Moldau. This guy had come from Central Florida. He's got a long history of prosecuting drug interdiction, which Puerto Rico has a massive problem of being, a relay point for drugs coming out of Colombia and Mexico, because they put this border wall up on the Mexican border. They're trying to transport a lot of it across the water through Puerto Rico. So there's structural stuff like that that's underway, and Puerto Rico long term, I think, can thrive and be a tremendous place. But again, this corruption issue has to be gotten under control. Creditors are not the problem, okay? Bondholders are not the problem in Puerto Rico. We're just like the after effect of it. And, we've had 4 years of this prior oversight board just focusing on us, as the problem. We're not the problem. And, President Trump says, look, just focus on the real problem here, which is cleaning the place up.
Sure. And you think they can keep taxes that low, or?
So here's the crazy thing. So taxes for high net worth people that go from the mainland there are almost nothing, but taxes on Puerto Ricans are high. So they've discriminated against their own citizens doing business. I mean, it's like 38% or something. It's like higher than mainland taxes. So, I mean, in that itself, why didn't the oversight board, put some discipline into the tax regime? You don't tax your local workers higher than you tax, rich guys coming from New York, right? And, as a consequence of this bloated tax regime, local tax regime they have there, a lot of people work off the books, and you have this massive gray economy. Look, and I'm not a huge social planner, but some of this stuff is so obvious it doesn't take a genius to see that it needs to be addressed. So.
All right, and so you see actually a pretty good future for Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Hope some things will change, but there's a lot of room for that. And
need discipline. You need the oversight board to really crack down and just say, you cannot issue government contracts for $150,000 without bidding them out, right? You have to, do what every state and local government in the mainland does. So.
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer. It was super educational for me, for sure, and I think for a lot of viewers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you came on.
Yes,
if people want to read more of your work or follow you, what are the best places where they
Twitter. I put all the legal documents and stuff up on Twitter.
Okay.
So yeah,
so
they can follow the fight there with sometimes with hashtags on the bond insurers that you mentioned. So they can follow it through those too.
Yeah, you're a blue check mark even, so that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, sure. Whatever that means on Twitter. Sure.
It says not everyone has a blue check mark. So thank you very much, and
thank you.
I'll let you go, and thank you. Okay, it's me again. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Since you got this far, I know you at least kind of liked it. Please like, subscribe, share this episode. It really means the world to me, and it's often I interview people about niche subjects or esoteric subjects or difficult subjects, and it really means a lot to my guests if they know there's really an audience for their expertise or their know-how, and so please let them know that you're here, and like and subscribe. That helps me to convince them to keep coming back and make more great episodes. Thank you very much. Have a great morning, day, whatever